Welcome back to the Mojo podcast with me, Richard Stokes. For all regular listeners and subscribers, you'll have noticed a longer gap than usual between episodes. Well, we moved house last weekend and frankly, I massively underestimated the task, especially as we now have a 4-month-old baby. Now Noah is a growing boy, but lifting boxes is not yet for him. So you know what, I gave myself a break and decided to skip a week and not beat myself up about it. There's a lot to be said for being kind to ourselves, especially now. Of course, moving house is a hefty task, yes, but fortunately it didn't prove too traumatic. And trauma, and specifically post-traumatic growth, is the subject for this week's episode. So a couple of questions might come up for you on that perhaps. Why talk about trauma, and how can there be growth following trauma? Well, trauma is part of the human condition. It can happen to any of us at any time. Of course, some people, countries and cultures will have a higher proportion of trauma in their lives, as trauma isn't equal or fairly distributed. Trauma is painful, stressful, frightening and devastating. And yes, in 2020, there is an extra large amount of trauma for all of us. And what about growth from trauma? Well, looking back at some of the guests on the show who have suffered from all manner, scale and type of trauma, from battlefield-induced PTSD to cancer diagnosis, abuse, bullying, to loss of jobs and livelihoods, all of which has had a huge impact on them. But all these people I've spoken to have somehow grown, developed and transitioned as a result of that trauma. So I wanted to go deeper into this area and explore further with someone about their experience of dealing with trauma and of surviving and growing as a direct result. My guest this week is Sophie Trew. Sophie is a cancer survivor after being diagnosed with blood cancer in 2014, then aged 23. This turned her life on its head and put her life on hold. How Sophie responded to her diagnosis and how she made her decisions lay the foundations for the growth she would feel when she eventually beat cancer. In 2017, Sophie co-created Trew Fields, the world's first cancer awareness and holistic health festival, and we talk about that in detail. Sophie also shares tips, wisdom and knowledge she has developed because she had to, being forced on this journey. In her words, she went from tequila to spirulina, and this journey has allowed her to unleash long-held dreams and ambitions, such as running her own festival. Sophie poses the question, what can grow beyond despair? It's a frank and honest conversation. We cover a lot of ground about gut health, exploring taboos, and we also have a short breathwork session, which I loved. Give it a go. Breathing right is fundamental to good mojo. Okay, content advisory time. This is a cancer survival story, and therefore the subject matter could be very triggering for you if you're going through something similar or a loved one is. So if this episode isn't for you, that's okay. The sad fact is cancer has probably impacted all of us in one way or another. I've been thinking a lot about my cousin Rob during the making of this episode. We lost Rob to testicular cancer 11 years ago and I miss him terribly. And just last week I learned about a former colleague of mine who had passed away after a long battle with a rare form of bowel cancer. She fought so hard to be around longer for her 2 girls and husband. The news is heartbreaking and almost unfathomable that someone I remember as being so fit and full of vitality could pass this way. So this week, I'm not asking for reviews, but instead for you to consider making a donation to a cancer charity that helps the search for cures and also looks after the families affected. I've put a link to Bowel Cancer UK in the show notes. So this is a hard subject area for sure, but it's a story that is full of hope, potentially some comfort and certainly inspiration given Sophie's approach to her own diagnosis and the growth following it. I really hope it can help you in some way. So, welcome back to the Mojo podcast, and I'm delighted to be joined today by my guest Sophie Trew, all the way from what sounds like a blustery Brighton in the UK. Sophie, how are you?
I'm fantastic, thank you. It definitely is a bit of a blustery morning here, as you say. The waves are coming over the edge of the wall, so it's one of those days.
Oh right, so you've got lots of wind, probably a high tide as well. So Brighton taking a bit of a kicking today, by the sounds of it.
It is indeed, yeah. But it's lovely, blowing away the cobwebs from the weekend.
Oh, right. Okay. So, and what did the weekend hold for you?
We actually went back to the farm where we have the festival, which we'll talk about later. But a festival that I put on with friends. We went back to the farm because we haven't done it this year, so we had a bit of a team gathering. So a bit of a celebratory weekend in honor of not having the event, which was really nice.
Great, great. And yes, we're going to talk about Trew Fields. We're going to come on to that shortly in the podcast. So, given what you've done at the weekend, you're sitting in Brighton today. How is your mojo today out of 10?
Okay, today out of 10, I'm going to go for a 6. But I think
Okay.
by the end of talking about my mojo in this podcast with you, hopefully it'll be rising up.
No pressure. No pressure. I have had experiences of guests, sort of certainly ending with a significantly higher mojo than they started with, and let's hope that happens. So 6. Tell me about that. What's going on for you?
So I'm just a few different changes happening. So I'm kind of in transition mode, and I guess for me that mojo is kind of that inner alignment, inner kind of connection. And so changing location, living location, switches up with work, I guess that kind of change in rhythm and pace. So I'm just finding my new groove. And I think when I'm kind of moving in the way or the rhythm that I'm used to, that's when I'd feel kind of more of a mojo lift.
Love that. So mojo for you, as you say, it's got this rhythm, this groove. It's almost musical, is what I'm
Yeah,
hearing from you.
exactly. And you kind of see people when you're listening to music and someone's running outside and they're running to the beat, or you feel like you kind of move to the beat when you're listening to a song. It's a bit like that.
Got it. Love that. Love that description of mojo for you, and that realization when you're definitely more in it, or it's more flowing for you, and you're moving to the beat of life, I guess.
Exactly. And I think we all have our own rhythm, and sometimes we try and go at someone else's beat, and that's when our mojo can go off a little bit. So yeah, it's finding my
Oh,
finding
love
my new
that.
beat. I sound like a musician, I'm really not.
But we've all got music in us, haven't we? Coursing through us. And I think, as you
Exactly.
say, when you understanding your own beat, I really like that. No one's really brought that yet to their definition. So thank you. I love that. So we were going to talk about a subject that we discussed on the phone a few weeks ago: post-traumatic growth.
Yes.
And the reason a big subject area, and one that there has been some uh, work done on by various psychologists, I think, around the world. It's been written about. But you brought this up, and it really intrigued me because, as I said in the intro, there's lots of trauma going on right now, and we're going to talk about your specific trauma soon, and also how that your experience and how you're now helping others partly through the festival and some other work you're doing. But shall we start there? Shall we reflect back, if that's okay, and that trauma that you experienced?
So in terms of going back to my initial post-traumatic growth early days, it's now about 6 years ago. In 2014, I'd recently graduated in journalism and was on a bit of a quest to. I'd always been really inspired by Latin America, South America, and was out there making a documentary on urban art in Colombia, in Bogota,
Mm.
and which was a really fascinating experience and trip. And after being out there for a few months, I came back and started to get some symptoms like night sweats and fatigue. And I kind of put it down
Mm.
to always being on the go. And life was very non-stop. I went to see this chiropractor with my mum. So I'm one of 5 kids, so it's quite rare that we go on a one-on-one outing together. But
Right, right, yeah.
she's a physio, and she was learning a new massage technique with this chiropractor. And I thought, as fate would have it, was the body for that day. And he was kind of doing all these clicks and twists. And he said, "There's something wrong with your breathing." And at that point, I was really asthmatic. Asthma's now gone since I've kind of changed a lot of things around my health and gut health and breathwork, which I know we'll go into as well. But the day after seeing him, this lump started to grow on my neck. We kind of gave it a nickname, and it kind of just became this thing that was just growing over the weeks. I was about to start a job in London in journalism, kind of wrapping up the documentary, and the lump just started to get bigger. I was 23 at the time, and also living a blissfully fairly kind of hedonistic lifestyle like we all are at that point. And lots of partying, lots of just fun times. But I had no idea, would never really cross my mind that cancer had never even been a word that I'd really kind of come across, or been obviously kind of grandparents and things. But cut a long story short, I was diagnosed with a blood cancer, and life was radically changed at that point. So it kind of felt like adulthood was just beginning. And I say that in the sense of we're all kind of working out what direction we're going in after university, and exploring life and that freedom. And then this diagnosis comes in, and felt like life was put on hold, and which feels like a thing that's kind of resonating at this time as well. And life's been put on hold for a lot of people. I think those in the those who have been through a life-changing diagnosis, or anything that's kind of been life-changing and put life on hold for them, it's like they've done the dress rehearsal. So this kind of recent period of with the virus, actually, those in the cancer community and other communities, it's kind of actually we've done this, we know how to do this. So but for me, it was like this period of time where everything was kind of put on pause, and I had to go through quite grueling treatment. So I had 6 months of chemotherapy, and for me also, and having done journalism, this kind of is the connecting point that led to everything. So I had a lot of questions, and I've always had a lot of questions. And just been really curious about how things work and why they work. So for me, and I guess maybe it was a coping mechanism, my first question was, why is this happening to so many people, and what can we do? And so that was my first doctor's meeting. And
as opposed to
why me?
Why is this happening to me?
Why me? Yeah. So this was my question, was why us, and what can we do about this?
Right.
And as I started to look into it, so my initial conversation with the doctor, and even in the past 5 years of me kind of having treatment, so much has changed. We're seeing some I'm going to say some junior doctors coming through talking about food as medicine and the importance of nutrition and mental health. But even back then, 5 years ago, the response that I got from my doctor, so I sat down, I just said, is there anything that I can do to help myself? And he just said, no, nothing you need to do. Keep doing what you're doing. Cancer's a lottery. No reason why you got it. And at that point, for me, that felt like a very unempowering, because I was someone who needed that kind of stimulation on feeling like I had a role to play in my own health. It felt like that was kind of taken away at that point. And I know for other people that might be supportive, because it doesn't make them feel like they need to do anything. It's a kind of a very passive response. But for me, I needed to feel like I had a part to play in my own body and mindset around it. So I started to research, and 90 to 95% of cancers are attributed to lifestyle and environmental factors, and 5% are genetics.
Wow.
So I was just thinking, why is no one asking me what I'm eating, what my environment's like, the different things that I've kind of come across in the past? We know that cancer isn't an overnight event. It's actually kind of a long-term experience when it turns up. So it can be about 5 or 10 years for some of them until it actually shows up for people to recognize what it is. So it wasn't just a thing that appeared. But I kind of went down this research exploring, and it felt like I kind of used the analogy that what we've got is the roof is leaking, and everyone's running around putting down buckets, but no one's looking at why the roof is leaking. And so we're kind of treating symptoms, and we have a sick care system rather than healthcare. So that's the kind of rabbit holes and exploring. And I was treated on a teenage cancer ward down on the south coast in England. And the only restaurant in the hospital at that time, again, this has changed, thank goodness, but it was Burger King. And you kind of just think, oh, there's so many areas. And the other thing, in terms of, I'm quite big on kind of ancient Greek words and their meanings behind them. Like the two words for time, we have chronos and kairos. So time in moments is kairos, and chronos is time on the clock, chronological. But the meaning of patient is the waiting one, and I didn't want to wait. So it led me down exploring what I could do for my mind and body, and I guess spirit, because when you're treated like a statistic, your spirit can kind of be left out of that. And by that I mean, what do we want to live for? What brings us joy? And that's nutrition in itself, isn't it? That's nourishment, not just food.
You made this decision quite early on, by the sounds of it, that having this passive being treated role was not one that you were going to accept, that you wanted to be active in that treatment as well, which as you say, it almost sounds, well, of course you would say that, but you know that when people sit in front of a doctor, we're kind of socialized to say, well, you're the expert here. You tell me. It's up to you to save my life, but you decided to do something different.
Yeah. And actually, doctor is meant to mean teacher, but I didn't feel like I was being taught anything. I was just being spoken to about symptoms and side effects. Yeah, that was the route I went down. And I know that we all have our own unique way of dealing with, I guess, big life changes and these shocks. But for me, that was what gave me motivation to feel like I could explore other things alongside the treatment I was having.
And so talk to me about some of those other things. You've mentioned some there in terms of your certain sort of gut health and what you're eating and spirituality. What did you really find for you that was this is it, this is what's working for me?
So a number of different things. I think we've all got our own kind of unique medicine, if I'm going to use that word, that makes us get back to vitality and health. And so for all of us, that's quite different. And it feels a bit like building a puzzle of what works for you and exploring things. But there are some cool factors, particularly when it comes to cancers. Again, every single person who gets cancer has a unique kind of epigenetics, background, environment, lifestyle, traumas. We've all got unique things on that front. But for me, a lot of it was around looking at how I could change the environment around those cells. And it was a step-by-step process, so it wasn't overnight. And I say that most of my healing happened when chemotherapy finished. And I had that moment to breathe and actually realize what had gone on, because you're kind of on this treadmill of just going to appointment, having the treatment, trying to manage the side effects. I'd have some days where I would be in bed for about a week after chemotherapy, and it would be a success if I could go to the toilet without being sick.
Wow.
So at that time, it felt like my identity was kind of being stripped away. It was very much a surrender alongside kind of your physical surrendering and losing your hair and those aspects, but also kind of letting go of how I thought things would be. But the things that really were supportive for me, so I had a couple of great people. I think people turn up at certain points in our lives, and my godmother came down with a juicer, so she was helping with that kind of nutrition side of what I was eating and drinking. And then I started exploring meditation. And for me, as someone who lived very much in their head, I often say cancer woke me up to a body that I didn't really realize existed. And that was one of the great blessings. But gut health, really key. So we know around 80% of our immune system's in our gut. So our gut can get sick and then we get sick. And for us to get better, we really need to work on that kind of gut health factor. And also 95% of our serotonin is produced in the gut. So if our gut is out of balance, we're not going to feel good mentally, physically, all of those aspects. So meditation, gut health, nutrition. I go on a mini trampoline, a rebounder to move my lymph. So I had cancer in the lymphatic system, and the lymph doesn't move by itself. So going on this trampoline is really good for that. Things like I got into breathwork a bit further down the line, but that was amazing because the way we breathe, it's kind of like our breath is our connection to ourselves. It's the first thing and the last thing we do. And I'd never thought about how I breathed, but I was severely asthmatic and had lung damage from one of the chemotherapy drugs. I no longer have asthma since making these changes. So when people say, how do you know that this kind of holistic health stuff works? It's just from seeing it firsthand and experiencing it. And also
Yeah.
seeing friends who have been the ones to take a bit of an empowered approach to their health. And some of them have been given months to live and they're here 5, 6, 10 years down the line. And just knowing that if some people have had a diagnosis like that and have outlived it, their expiry date, in quotes, then it can be so possible for others. And why can't you
Yes.
be one of those people? So, yeah, I think there's a
Yes.
lot of hope within that.
Yeah. So taking this sort of almost, as you say, recreating this identity, taking some control back. Is this where for you, coming, I don't say coming out of the trauma yet, but within it, some growth was already happening?
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of like this accelerated, transformative yet destructive process. So
Ooh.
yeah, it was kind of cancer, and we all have our different lessons, whatever it shows up as. So whether it shows up as cancer, whether it shows up as grief, whatever it is, I think it can be some of our greatest teachers. Those unexpected times,
Mm.
and so for me, it was like a big overhaul on all levels.
And so you came through that trauma, you got yourself well again, and this is 6 years ago,
Yeah, 6 years ago.
and all clear now.
All clear, all doing well.
Wonderful. Wow.
So
Wow.
I had my 5-year sign off from the hospital this year,
Oh,
um,
that's amazing.
which felt pretty emotional actually, walking back down those corridors and just realizing
Yeah.
how much had changed for me as well. It was very vulnerable. I had to actually take sedatives when I was on the hospital because at certain points throughout the treatment, I couldn't mentally cope with being there. So I kind of disconnected. So that realizing how much had changed on that front was pretty amazing.
Yeah. And talking of change, so you come out the other side of the cancer, and then I guess the choices are, you go back to, I guess, the old normal, kind of
Yeah.
in comparison to where we are now. I go to the old normal or seize the new normal, and you seem to have gone to the new. Tell us about what changes you made, what happened for you.
So I guess predominantly on the direction I thought I was going in terms of work.
Mm.
Um, it actually led to quite a creative time. For me, I'm quite a creative person, so always seeing these elements of how can we kind of create from challenging situations. And so
Mm.
I think realizing, when we learn something new and we get very excited to tell someone about that. And so you kind of see someone who's just recently done a course or learned a new skill, and all they can talk about is that. Um,
Yes.
and for
Yes.
me, coming out the other side of the illness, I was very kind of, people need to know about all that they can do. And I think a lot of us can be like that. And so I went in the direction of working for a charity for a year, supporting young women going through cancer treatment, and setting up health workshops and things like that, which was fantastic. And
Yeah.
I just knew, actually, I think, you know, that thing, how we connect the dots when we look back. And sometimes we can feel like, why we've gone in a completely different direction, but actually we realize all of the skills that we had lead to where we are now.
Yes. Very much resonates. Yes.
Yeah. So sometimes people, family will say, oh, don't you want to go back to journalism? And I kind of think, actually, I'm using those skills, but in a very different way. But it's
Mm.
still, that's kind of those learnings are underneath what I've been doing. So um moved so started with the charity, and then also it's my lifestyle, which is actually quite tricky in your early 20s, mid 20s, because I didn't know any other friends who'd been through what I'd been through. And
Yeah.
so everything kind of revolves around the pub and drinking and those kind of activities, particularly in the UK, I think. And so it's this thing of so much has changed for you, but then how to, I guess, integrate those aspects.
Yeah,
And that,
because you wanted to maintain a lot of this, as you say, this connection with your body, understanding what your body needed, right?
yeah, exactly. And that takes time to kind of work out. So much has changed. So it's hard to integrate back into the role that you play in friend groups, or who kind of, it was a real time of working out who you are, which again, your 20s are. And then this extra thing on top of it was quite,
Yeah, just this little extra thing.
it was quite a shift.
Yes.
But I've definitely, it's been a very creative few years, and I guess we can move on to how the festival was born and
I would love to. I'd love to get into the festival, and I know obviously this year's been a very challenging year for it with all live events and festivals. But yeah, tell us about Trew Fields and how you came to set it up, what it is, who comes.
So it is it's the first cancer awareness and holistic health festival, and often that raises a few eyebrows of how can you make a festival out of something so serious. Festivals are supposed to be about fun
Yeah.
and a lot of kind of, I guess, music and comedy and that kind of thing. And for me, it's kind of how can we bring joy and lightness to a time in people's life with an illness that can be very heavy. And I always think while we're still living, we still have, while there's still breath, there's still life, there's still joy. So let's seize that, even if it's for the days or whatever it is. So a lot of my ideas are formed on runs.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Running's like my meditation.
Yeah.
And so in recovery, after probably a few months in bed, I felt like I was kind of in a bit of rehab post-treatment. And everyone kept asking what I was doing now and what I was eating and what I was drinking and all of these things. And my confidence was rock bottom. And I felt like I needed to go and do something for me. And so before treatment, had been in Colombia, and I told my oncologist I was going off to Costa Rica for a very relaxing trip, but actually ended up backpacking through Mexico down to Nicaragua and
Right.
down to Costa Rica, which involved a
Right.
little bit of hitchhiking and other things. And in that time, started exploring medicine out there and the different treatments that they have in Mayan culture, and how, and also looking at how in Asia that kind of Eastern approach to health versus our Western approach. And I think this ties in with realizing, particularly in the UK, we have some of the worst survival rates for certain illnesses, particularly cancer in Europe. And I wanted
Right.
to know how other places were treating illness, which is a fascinating trip. So that was quite a research trip. In that time, started learning about different treatments, different tools that cultures have for their health, herbs, going back to our kind of roots, I guess, and going back to simplicity. And I started to think how amazing it would be to bring some of these people together and to have it in a context where we can all learn from each other. And so the festival was born as a way to bring some of the people that had inspired me most on my kind of recovery together in a field with music and food and talks and workshops. So it's a weekend of learning, fun, entertainment, and people travel from across Europe. We have doctors from America, and yeah, it takes place on a farm an hour south of London in Surrey, on a friend's farm. So we've done it for 3 years. In 2017, I said to a friend in the pub, as all good ideas are formed in the pub, I'd love to put on this festival. And he amazingly said, you can do it on my farm. And since then, we've put it on together. So we've kind of been I'm not sure what the word is, but co-creators, I guess, of this event. And he works in production, and I've been doing the programming and bringing together all sorts of amazing people to share their wisdom. And so it's a really, really special event. It's grown from about 400 to 1,000 people. And it's just really, it's amazing what can happen when we come together, and there's kind of silent discos in the morning, and lots of creativity and lots of fun.
Yeah. So a kind of as you said, a distillation of everything that you'd gone on that journey to learn about, bringing it to one place where anyone who was suffering from cancer, I guess survivors of, friends of, could plug
Family
into.
members, yeah.
Yeah.
People come with their families, and it's kind of that thing of because we can be so isolated. I think we can be isolated in our struggles, we can be isolated in our grief, everything that actually can get us to our vulnerability. We can also feel quite lonely because we don't
Mm,
necessarily reach out to each other in that point. And so coming together in a field where people can kind of let their guard down and just enjoy themselves. Families come together. We have people saying it's a life-changing weekend for them. People make friends for
wow.
life. It's really special. And so
Yeah.
there's camping, there's an on-site brewery, so they actually have their own on-site. They make their own craft beer on the farm, which is amazing. So everything's
Lovely.
very much kind of from the farm.
Yeah.
We have a fermentation bar, so people are having kind of gut-boosting cocktails with kombucha and kefir and rum and all sorts. It's brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. Because as you said up front, you might say that a festival based around cancer might not sound like the most fun thing, to be frank, but
Yeah,
it sounds like what you've taken and flipped that. And as you said, the I guess almost the definition of a festival is the coming together of people in community and in harmony, just wanting to be together. And God, we all miss that right now.
big time.
And I can
Yeah.
just imagine the collective power of all those people being together.
Totally. And people turn up, maybe you kind of turn up a little bit apprehensive on the first day. And
Mm,
then within that time, the next 2, 3 days, I think that's the beauty of festivals for me having. So I'd worked at a few festivals when I was around kind of 17, 18. And I think that was the 4 years I'd wanted to put on a festival kind of
mm,
as a kind of closet dream, I guess, something I kind of kept in. And cancer gave me the purpose of what that would be about, which is quite a strange thing. But yeah, people, it's that beauty of what can happen in 2 or 3 days because it's rare that we really spend that time together and they can be quite
mm,
immersive and special.
mm. And what's the? I was going to ask about the difficult side of this. You talked about people before, kind of going beyond their expiry date, and
Yeah.
without getting morbid here, but I imagine there are people who don't come back the next
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had two close friends die quite recently,
Mm,
and it becomes a strange situation that you kind of are keeping their essence alive, but also wondering. Yeah, it's definitely highs and lows of it. We had one lady who spent her final weekend of her life at the festival with her four
oh
daughters,
wow,
and I got an
wow,
email from one of them saying it was the most amazing experience for them.
yeah,
And very healing. We had a 6-year-old boy with a brain tumor who ended up singing on stage. You know the song "I am brave, I am bold. This is who I'm meant to be. This is me." I'm not sure what that song is, but that's the line.
yeah.
And his mum said that it was his dream to sing on stage, and he got to fulfill that before he then died a few months later. And
Oh
it is
gosh,
a space where I guess while it's a taboo concept, we explore lots of different taboos like medicinal cannabis and like other things. It's also a space
mm,
to talk openly about dying and what that means for all of us.
mm,
Because really, one of my close friends did a talk last year. Her talk is live like you're dying. That's her kind of essence and message. And she got on stage and she just said, okay, put your hands up if any of you are dying. If any of you have kind of been given a diagnosis, that means you're dying. And a few people put their hand up and she said, actually, all of us have got that diagnosis because we're all terminal. And it's just what we choose to do with that because
mm,
I think we have these moments that do wake us up to life. And so cancer can wake us up to living and changing certain aspects of our lives. And I guess that flows into our kind of post-traumatic growth concept of
mm.
what we what can grow beyond despair. But yeah, the festival is it's a challenge for me emotionally in that sense because I do get um there are obviously people that you closely connect with who aren't there the next year.
Yeah, yeah. But as you say, almost the festival keeps their essence going year on year.
Absolutely. And I think we could do with a bit of a mojo blast around death, because I think we in the UK, I'm not sure about the rest of Europe. I just
Yeah.
speak from here. We have a very sanitized way of dealing with it. People used to die at home. I know people do still, but it's become very much kind of we don't really often see loved ones at that point sometimes, where it can be very kind of quick. And also, I don't think, for example, in Mexico, and looking at ways that other countries deal with death, they have kind of Day of the Dead. In India, there's amazing ceremonies in a place called Varanasi where,
Yeah.
have you been
On the
there?
Ganges. I haven't, but I've seen some of the ceremonies going on. That's on the Ganges, isn't it? Is that
Yeah,
where?
exactly.
Yeah.
But I think it's still so taboo, but yeah, it's going to happen to all of us.
Well, I think it's possibly the ultimate taboo, isn't it? That we
Yes.
just absolutely. I mean, this is very much from an Anglo-Saxon UK viewpoint, because that's where I guess I'm speaking from.
Yeah,
But I think it is. We find it incredibly difficult to talk about it, probably until it's too late.
absolutely. And the area of we can have a good birth, so why can't we have a good death? Because dying, the way we die matters, and it can be quite profound and transformative. And I've had friends talking about being very present for that, because yeah, so it's also what I find is that amazing thing that when things are stripped away and people connect, and I guess this is why some friendships can be so strong when you've been through a shared experience that can be quite traumatic, is that there is no bullshit. There's not any of that kind of small talk or those layers that we can sometimes have. There's just that realness, because you've got nothing really to lose or nothing.
Just the truth. Just
Exactly.
the truth.
And
Yeah.
so we have people saying, oh, I kind of reconnected with my family, or I did this, or I did this. And so I would just love it if people did that sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you say, to the theme that we're talking around, post-traumatic growth.
Yeah. Should we
That
explore what that means a little bit?
yes. Let's get into that. Let's get into that. What do we mean by that?
So there are kind of certain areas to that. So I used to do a talk which was called From Tequila to Spirulina. And it was kind of about
Like it.
me as tequila kind of party girl, to spirulina. I don't actually drink spirulina, but it rhymes with tequila. So that was
Yes, and super healthy, as we know.
the
Yes,
green algae, which
the green
really
algae.
is very good for you. But the idea is that so for a lot of people, I think there's a very high statistic of people, particularly on the wards that I was treated on, the teenage cancer wards, who go through PTSD after a cancer diagnosis. And the kind of route that I was going in is post-traumatic growth. And so there are kind of a number of different areas to that, but it's kind of those factors of, and I think right now for a lot of us, a lot of people are talking about the unusual things that have come out of this time of COVID as well. And so maybe my priorities have changed. The things that I actually care about are slightly different. This obviously isn't for everyone, but for some people, others might think I'm not afraid to do what makes me happy. And that can be in the sense of, actually, I might work from home more often, or I might be more conscious about who I spend my time with, or become less of a stranger in my own home, these kind of things. Other aspects, I understand myself better. I know who really am, because
And when did that emerge for you, out of interest, in terms of that real sense of understanding self?
probably about a year and a half ago, when I really discovered breathwork and I came into my body and kind of connected my mind and body, that understanding.
And I'm really pleased you bring up breath work. We talked a little bit about this before. Uh, that's something I know a tiny bit about it. I know you do a lot of it. I would love to share some tips, if that's okay,
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
the listeners, because I just think this is something we could all benefit from, whatever the level of trauma, high, medium, low, that we're going through or will go through.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't even need to be about that. It can just be about Maybe it can support you with exercise, or maybe it can support you with energy or fatigue or whatever it is, because we could all do with a bit of a mojo boost, I guess.
Absolutely right.
And so breath, it's really life. It's our life force. But often, if we think back to the time when we held a baby, and even looking at animals or a dog breathing or a cat breathing, they have this just constant fluid motion. I think, Richard, didn't you say you've got a 3-month-old?
Yes, as our little boy Noah is
Oh.
3 months, and exactly that. I spend hours just staring at him, frankly. And you do see that constant motion, just
Exactly.
that he's understanding his body, but yet certainly all his breath coming from a big, his big belly. I
Yeah.
love it.
And from the diaphragm. So a lot of people don't even know what their diaphragm is. So that's the muscle that runs underneath your rib cage, which is there to support your breathing. But a lot of us in particularly Western society are breathing mainly in our upper chest. So you could do it now. You could put one hand on your belly and one hand on your upper chest and just
All right.
take a...
Okay, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it now. So I know people can't see us, but I have got a hand on my belly and a hand on my upper chest. Okay.
And relax your jaw, relax your shoulders. Often we can carry a lot of tension in our jaw and shoulders. And we're just going to take a couple of breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth. And just notice as you do that, is one of your hands moving more than the other? Maybe it's just your belly, maybe it's just your upper chest, maybe it's both.
Slightly more my belly.
Okay, great. So a lot of people are upper chest breathers, and a lot of people might find that they hold their breath throughout the day. Or they might be very shallow breathers. And so the deeper we breathe as well, the more energy we're going to take in, the more oxygenated our body's going to be. And when we breathe out about 70% of the toxins in our body. So if we're really shallow breathing, our body has to work extra hard to remove these things that come into us.
Right.
And you can really tell people's emotional state by the way they breathe as well. And it's fascinating. It can be so life-changing when we look at that the way that we do breathe. Because as children, if we go back to kind of babies, the first thing when we start to experience fear or trauma, the first thing we tend to change is our breath. So from about the age of 3 or 4, we might start to develop a different breathing pattern. And most people have their own, it's like a fingerprint. The way that we breathe is like our kind of unique fingerprint. But most people have a bit of a dysfunctional breath before they look at it. And this can lead to back challenges, to different things because of the way we hold ourselves.
Right.
But for me, it was a tool of really getting back into my body and feeling grounded. And there's an American psychotherapist who said that, so it's similar to transformational breath work, if anyone listening has done transformational breath, but it's a therapy. So we use movement, we use sound, we use the breath, obviously. And the psychotherapist said that one transformational breath work is similar to 2 years in therapy and 2 years in talking therapy, because we get into the body. And I don't know if you've read The Body Keeps the Score and books on that, but we hold all of our emotions in the body.
Right.
So if we don't
Okay.
let those go, then they're kind of still in us.
Yeah.
So we hold on to stress, we hold on to different things. But breathwork can be amazing for getting into the parasympathetic nervous system. So we have 2 parts of our nervous system. We've got the sympathetic, which is the fight or flight. And then we have the parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. And if we're trying to heal anything, whether it's physical, mental, particularly to kind of reduce inflammation, heal around cancer, we want to get into the parasympathetic. And so the breath is the quickest way to do this. That kind of I know of is to breathe out longer than we breathe in, but also to really breathe into your belly, that belly breathing. But there's a lot of elements. I could talk about breathwork all day, but
Yeah. Well, I've been could do a separate one just on that, and I have been just as we've been talking, just breathing, really focusing on breathing into my belly, and I do feel actually quite lightheaded.
yeah,
That
interesting.
oxygen that's coming in, I do feel quite and energized at the same time. So
Exactly.
I need to definitely focus more on that.
Well, this is why a lot, so people are kind of going into oxygen chambers and flooding their body with oxygen. There's therapy, hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And in a lot of kind of illness states, disease states, it's in a low oxygenated state. So if we're shallow breathing, and it's the quickest way to come into the present moment, is to really be mindful of your breath and to watch that.
Yeah.
And there's
And
also,
do you have a technique for getting into, as you say, that present moment? Is there a simple technique people can learn?
I quite like, so you can do box breathing, which is where you breathe in for the same amount of time as you breathe out, and then you hold your breath for that time. But
Yeah.
a nice grounding breath, particularly for anyone who wants to kind of calm down, get into that parasympathetic, and also to support sleep, is to breathe in for 4, hold for the count of 7, and then breathe out your mouth for 8.
Right.
That's a really
4,
nice.
7, 8.
Yeah, exactly. So breathe in the
Right.
nose for 4, hold for 7, out the mouth for 8.
Fabulous. Okay. Well, I'm gonna try that after the the podcast, but I think that's a great tip for anyone, as you say, wanting to get into that parasympathetic nervous system, really calm. Maybe got some anxiety, or as you say, some sleep challenges. That could really help.
It's fantastic for anxiety because also it comes back to what tense are we living our lives in. And so breathwork can really help us let go. So when we exhale, it's all about letting go. When we inhale, it's all about what we take in, inspiration, inspiring that creativity. Um, and often you can see if someone struggles to, when we look at a breathing pattern in a session, if someone holds their breath before they breathe out, you'll ask them, how are you at letting go? And often they'll come back and say, not so good. And then the breathing in is all about receiving. So people who might take a while to breathe in, how are you at receiving from yourself? But it's all about kind of what do we want more of and what do we want to let go of. And so many tools, if we think about yoga, if we think about meditation, it's all about that belly, that kind of breathing.
Yeah, it's amazing. Is it something we don't even take it for granted because it's not even conscious, or it's not conscious enough, I would say, for lots of us. But if we are more conscious about it, there's so much we can get out of just simply breathing better.
And it's such a game-changing tool, and it's free. It's just,
who wouldn't want that? A game-changing tool for free that's
yeah,
great for your health and for your mojo. Brilliant. Well,
exactly.
Sophie, we're kind of closing a little bit on the time for today. I just wanted to touch on, obviously, appreciate this year Trew Fields couldn't happen,
Yes.
but there's lots of other things that you are doing. Where's the best place for people to kind of find out more about what you're doing right now?
Yeah, so the Trew Fields website, trewfields.com. It's about TREW fields.com. I guess out of this time and not doing the festival, which was for events and music, it's just been huge. It was such a, everything was in place. I actually had about 3,000 flyers delivered just before lockdown was announced, the day
Oh,
before.
wow.
Um, and so it was kind of just about to go out with all of that. All the lineup was in place, everything good to go. And so we've had to postpone it. But
Yeah.
I have launched a online version of it. So it's a monthly online membership. And each month we have different speakers and workshops. And we have a breathwork and meditation session. And it's really kind of about bringing the festival online, but staying connected. And I think the beauty of that is it can be a global community, whereas there are limitations on traveling to a live event and a festival.
Yes. Yes.
And we can bring in speakers from all over the world. So it's been really special. I've been running that for a couple of months. So that is open if anyone knows anyone who would benefit from support on the kind of more the mind, the body, holistic approaches. There is a
Fabulous.
membership, which is the True Health community on the festival site. And I also do my
Great.
breath work. So you could find me on Instagram, Sophie Trew, and yeah, Facebook likewise.
Fabulous. And all these links, they'll be in the show notes so people can come and find you and get in touch really easily.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Brilliant. So I just wanted to close on, I know you've talked a lot about the things that you're doing for your growth, but almost those daily practices. Could you give me 3 things that really help you?
Running by the sea, going in the sea. For me, the water is there's just something really healing about water, and cold water as well in particular. So moving by the sea was something I've wanted to do for years, and it's amazing to be down here recently. Breathwork, absolutely. Do a little bit of kind of like shaking and movement. I'm just going to add in, it's going to be more than 3.
That's okay.
I'm definitely making sure I have something nourishing to eat. So I think even if it's kind of a smoothie or something that kind of is supportive. I also do dry brushing each day, and that really helps, which is
dry brushing. What's that?
It's where you kind of brush your body with a brush, and get the lymphatic system moving. So I'm really big on that system because, it's just kind of keeping prevention in check. And then the other thing is a non-negotiable is like a kind of great conversation with a friend or a loved one is quite key.
Yeah, I love that. You talked about a lot about nourishment in there, and I love that sort of mental, emotional nourishment as well as a physical nourishment.
Exactly. And people often don't think about the fact that I've had quite a few friends say recently, I've been quite anxious, and I've realised I've had the news on the whole time, and I'm reading the news. And that's the food we're giving ourselves. It's what we're listening to. It's who we're spending time with. It's what we're really taking into ourselves as well is big.
Absolutely, all those inputs, which is actually something we can have a level of control over, right? In a time where we feel lots is outside of our control, you can actually control those inputs.
Yeah, exactly. And when you say input, it's that element. And I think this is probably the big shift that happened for me over the past kind of 5-6 years, is it's living life from the inside out rather than the outside in. And I was definitely someone who kind of people pleaser, would do everything for everyone, that kind of mentality, but not ever really checking in on my own inner knowing or what I wanted. And that's what the change is, I guess, that kind of the input, but moving inward out.
Brilliant. Sophie, well, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for having
me. An incredible and inspiring story of, as you say, as you talked about post-traumatic growth and everything you've done and that you're doing for lots of people. So I really congratulate that and look forward to hopefully attending Trew Fields in person next year.
Fantastic. You can do a live podcast, Mojo podcast on site.
Let's do it. Mojo podcast goes live at Trew Fields. Brilliant. Okay, Sophie, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Mojo podcast at Trew Fields next year. Let's make it happen. I have to say I'm somewhat in awe of Sophie, to be honest, and of what she's overcome and how she did it and what she's done since, all that growth. We're talking about following the trauma. I think about myself at the age of 23. Now, I may have been educated and fairly well travelled, but I don't think I had anything close to her awareness and determination to create her own outcome, literally not taking the prognosis she was given as a matter of fact. As she said, asking questions was key for her. And that really crucial understanding that all the skills that we've had, lead to where we are now, and which for Sophie is about bringing hope and joy to thousands of people through the festival and her community. So I was really pleased to get deeper into this subject of post-traumatic growth and how it really is different to something like resilience, as it's more than bouncing back to kind of where you were, but it's about fundamental change, real development, a new you even. It reminds me of the concept of the crucible. It's an experience that you go through which fundamentally reshapes your view on the world and how you approach your life. And that can be useful for all of us because we're all going through experiences that might seem awful and tragic, but it will shape you and it will help you grow again. I've got links to Sophie's Trew Fields site in the show notes where you can find out more about the actual live festival next year, but also this community of cancer support that she is building. So get involved in that. She's also a great follow on Instagram. And as promised, there is a link to Bowel Cancer UK in the show notes. So leave a donation if you can, or whichever cancer charity you support. They all need all our support right now, especially in this year of tough times around events that aren't happening that they'd usually rely on for a lot of their donations. So until next week, when I'll have another fabulous guest talking about their Mojo story, I hope your Mojo continues to flow.